On September 4th, 2006, the world lost Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, in a diving accident off the coast of Queensland. He was 44 years old. He left behind his wife, Terri, his 8-year-old daughter, Bindi, and a 2-year-old son named Robert, who has almost no direct memory of his father at all. Nearly 20 years later, that 2-year-old is a Wildlife Photographer of the Year award winner, a primetime television host on 2 continents, a Dancing with the Stars champion, and the face of national ad campaigns for brands like Bonds and Columbia Sportswear. This is not a story that needs exaggeration or invented ballroom scenes to be compelling. The verified, on-the-record facts of Robert Irwin's rise, and his mother's own words about surviving the years that made it possible, are dramatic enough on their own. Robert Clarence Irwin was born on December 1st, 2003. He was 2 years old when his father died, which means that unlike his older sister Bindi, he grew up with almost no lived memory of Steve Irwin. Whatever relationship he has with his father today has been built largely secondhand, through documentary footage, family stories, and the zoo his father built. Robert has spoken about this directly. In a 2025 interview with People magazine, he credited his mother for making sure that Gap never felt like a wound in his daily life. Say it was a credit to my mom that he never felt like he had missed out growing up. That is Robert's own framing, not a tabloid one, and it matters because it points to where the real story lives. Not in a single dramatic night, but in 2 decades of steady, unglamorous work by a single mother who had just become a widow, a CEO, and a public figure overnight. Terri Irwin, an American originally from Eugene, Oregon, met Steve at Australia's zoo in October 1991 and married him the following year. The couple had 14 years together before his death. Terri has since spoken candidly, if sparingly, about that loss. In a 2024 interview with Us Weekly, she explained why she has never remarried, telling the outlet that she had already had her happily ever after with Steve and was comfortable being on her own, even as she remains, in her words, lonely for Steve. That is a meaningfully different statement than grief theater. It is a woman describing a specific, considered peace she has made with her life, not a performance of sadness for cameras. Terri has also spoken about the practical, almost brutal logistics of the days immediately following Steve's death. In an interview with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation given that same year, she described the discipline it took just to function, saying she could not fall apart because her children were right there in front of her and that she had to keep Australia Zoo running as a business, not just a memorial. She also gave her late husband credit for the fact that the zoo was even structurally able to survive him, noting that he had built the business, so it could continue if anything ever happened to him. Those are the real mechanics of what happened after 2006, a grieving woman managing a multi-million-dollar wildlife park while raising 2 young children largely in public. Terri has since reframed that period not as a burden, but as the thing that kept her going. In a 2024 Instagram post marking Mother's Day, she wrote that being a single mother after Steve's death was never a burden, and that it was actually her children who gave her purpose, courage, and happiness every day. It's a strikingly warm way to describe what most people would assume was simply survival, and it lines up with how her son now talks about her. Robert has returned that credit publicly and specifically. Speaking to People magazine in 2025, he described his mother as the biggest guiding light in his life and said she was the bravest, most steadfast person he had ever met. Someone he considers the epitome of a great leader and a great mother. He went further, describing how Steve had built a life with her and then, in Robert's words, had the rug pulled out from under her, yet she still managed to pick up the pieces with grace while remaining present for both of her children. This is Robert's own on-record description of his mother's resilience, not a narrator's guess at what he might have felt. Long before Robert Irwin became a red carpet fixture, he built something quieter and, in its own way, more impressive. A genuine career as a wildlife photographer, earned entirely on merit rather than family name. In December 2020, at 17 years old, Robert won the People's Choice Award at the Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition, one of the most respected nature photography contests in the world, run by London's Natural History Museum. His winning image, titled Bushfire, showed a stark aerial split between untouched forest and blackened, fire-ravaged land near the Steve Irwin Wildlife Reserve in Cape York, Queensland. He captured it by drone, spotting smoke on the horizon, and launching the drone with only a few minutes of battery life left before flying it directly into the smoke to get the shot. The image was chosen from a field of roughly 49,000 submissions and received more than 55,000 public votes. Speaking about the win at the time, Robert said nature photography, for him, was about telling a story that could make a difference to the planet, and that having this particular image recognized felt both like a personal honor and a reminder of humanity's responsibility toward the natural world. It was not his only recognition in the field. According to his own photography portfolio site, he was also highly commended in the broader Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition in 2018 and separately honored in the Winland Smith Rice International Photography Awards. He has since judged photo contests himself, including for National Geographic Kids, and has led photography expeditions across Africa, New Zealand, and other parts of the world, building a body of work entirely separate from the crocodile hunter's son label he grew up under. This period matters because it is the part of Robert's story with the least public spectacle attached to it. There was no red carpet for a drone photograph of a bushfire. It was simply proof, arriving quietly in his late teens, that whatever came next for him did not have to be inherited. It could be earned. Robert's move into mainstream entertainment accelerated through 2025 and into 2026, and it happened on two fronts at once: television hosting and high-profile brand partnerships. On the hosting side, Robert became co-host of the Australian version of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, alongside Julia Morris on Network 10, stepping into a major primetime hosting role in his home country. That same period, he also began hosting a Dancing with the Stars spinoff, Dancing with the Stars, The Next Pro, which premiered in the United States. The bigger television moment, though, came on the main competition floor. Robert competed on Dancing with the Stars Season 34 in the United States, debuting on the show on September 16, 2025. His connection to the show was already personal. A decade earlier, at just 11 years old, he had watched his older sister Bindi win the same competition in 2015 with partner Derek Hoff. On November 25, 2025, Robert and his professional partner Whitney Carson won Season 34 outright, taking home the Len Goodman Mirrorball Trophy after finishing the finale with a judges and audience score of 89 out of possible 90 points, beating finalists that included Olympic gymnast Jordan Childs, influencer Alex Earl, and actor Dylan Efron. At 21 years old, Robert became the youngest male winner in the show's history, surpassing Jordan Fisher, who had won the title at 23 in 2017. The win carried real physical cost. Robert competed through a rib injury sustained just before the finale, which his partner Whitney Carson later said made it difficult for him to breathe during rehearsals and forced the pair to cut a lift from their final freestyle routine for his safety. He pushed through it anyway. In an interview with Deadline after the win, Robert said he had wanted to live out a dream he'd carried since watching his sister lift that same trophy, and that simply being on the floor, regardless of outcome, would have been enough for him. The emotional center of the win, by his own account, was his father. Accepting the trophy, an emotional Robert said he had wanted to make his dad proud and wished Steve could have been there to see it. It was also a family milestone in a very literal sense. Exactly 10 years to the day after Bindi's own Dancing with the Stars win, a second Mirrorball trophy came home to Australia Zoo. Bindi marked the moment on Instagram, telling her brother how proud she was and calling him lucky to have as a sister, while separately celebrating that two Mirrorball trophies now call Australia Zoo home. Alongside the television work, Robert became one of the most in-demand young brand ambassadors in the English-speaking world, and the numbers behind those deals are a matter of public record rather than internet rumor. In April 2025, Australian underwear brand Bonds launched its first-ever U.S. campaign, called Made for Down Under, fronted by Robert Irwin posing alongside real snakes, spiders, and crocodiles, with rapper K. Midza modeling the women's line. According to marketing analytics firm Launchmetrics, the campaign generated $8 million in media impact value in its first week alone, more than the brand had generated in all of 2024 combined. Bonds itself reported that the campaign drove 1.3 million TikTok searches for Robert's name in connection with the ad within the first 4 days, a 96% jump in the brand's TikTok following, and organic social media impressions up roughly 7,000% in a single week, reaching more than 58 million people. Robert gained more than 700,000 new TikTok followers off the back of the campaign. He later told People magazine that preparing for the shoot meant cutting carbs and doing more sit-ups than he ever had in his life, adding that he simply wanted to look and feel his best and confident going into it. Then in fall 2025, Robert was named the global brand ambassador for Columbia Sportswear, a company with deep personal history for him. He met the brand's late founder, Gert Boyle, when he was just 5 years old, and his very first khakis uniform was Columbia gear. Announcing the partnership, Robert said he had dedicated his life to sharing the beauty of the natural world and encouraging people outdoors, and that Columbia's gear had played an important role in making that possible. He appeared in the brand's Engineer for Whatever campaign to the winter and spring, and in May 2026 fronted a follow-up spot filmed in the Australian outback, in which he was chased by 100 inflatable crocodiles while field testing the company's new hiking shoes. Geary said he had already tested for real, wrangling 15-foot saltwater crocodiles in chest-deep mud during his own conservation fieldwork. Taken together, the photography awards, the television hosting jobs, the Dancing with the Stars title, and the ad campaigns tell a consistent story. A young man who spent his adolescence quietly building an independent professional identity, then stepped into wide public visibility on his own terms in his early 20s, rather than being pushed into the spotlight as a child. It would be easy and dishonest to invent a single cinematic night when Terri Irwin supposedly realized her son had transformed. The truth, based on her own public statements over the past 2 decades, is less like a movie scene and more like the story of 2 decades of daily labor. Terri has spoken repeatedly and with real specificity about the sacrifices involved in keeping her family and the zoo intact after 2006. She has also, notably, refused to frame her life since then purely as tragedy. In interviews marking nearly 20 years since Steve's death, she has described navigating grief on her own terms, once telling reporters that the only real rule for handling loss is that whatever path you choose can't hurt you and can't hurt anyone else, a philosophy she said she leaned on instead of, as she put it, looking for solace in a bottle of tequila. She has also spoken about the quieter, ongoing loneliness that remains even in a full and purposeful life, saying that while she's sure there are plenty of lovely people in the world, she is not actively looking to date or remarry. What comes through in nearly every interview is not a woman waiting for a single redemptive moment, but a woman who built redemption slowly, year after year, largely out of public view, managing lawsuits, running a business, showing up for late-night conversations with grieving kids, and refusing to let a media narrative define her family as permanently broken. Robert's own description of her, someone who had everything upended and still managed to raise 2 children with grace while keeping her late husband's mission alive, is the clearest evidence of how that work actually landed on the people who lived through it with her. What makes Robert Irwin's rise genuinely interesting is not that he looks like his father, though he does, or that he's inherited some of Steve's on-camera energy, though he clearly has. It's that his path to public recognition has run through territory his father never touched: fashion campaigns, ballroom dance competitions, and fine art wildlife photography exhibited at the Natural History Museum in London. He built an independent reputation as a photographer years before most people outside Australia knew his name for anything beyond being Steve Irwin's son. He then stepped into mainstream entertainment as an adult, on projects he actively chose, and won on the strength of that work rather than nostalgia alone. None of that required tears in a ballroom or a secret transformation narrative to be true. It required a mother who, by her own account and her son's, refused to let a national tragedy define the rest of both of their lives, and a young man who spent his 20s turning inherited grief into a body of work that is unmistakably, verifiably his own.